All right. I'm going to dive in and do a few introductions, and then we'll let Taylor give the meat of her talk since we're at a little bit after 7 o'clock now. I say Central. Our time zone on our meetup, in case everyone noticed, is Pacific time because the WordPress Foundation set it up for us. And so it says it's based in San Francisco, California, but I always talk like Central time because that's where I'm located.
That's why I was like, I was so confused when I got the invite because I'm like, wait, is it Central? Is it Eastern? Is it Pacific? I'm like, I don't know.
It's a little weird.
I
We're
know.
trying to figure out how to work the cross country meetup thing because it's new for WordPress. Um, but let me share just a couple of quick announcements. The first one is join our Facebook group. If you haven't already, it's facebook.com/group/WordPress.accessibility. And we can throw a link up. Maybe Emma can stick that link in the chat in case anybody wants it. It's a great way to connect between meetups and get some help or just chat accessibility. And then next to upcoming meetups and what they are, the first one will be Thursday, August 5th at 8 a.m. Pacific. So if you are out there on the Pacific Coast, you need to have your coffee for that meetup. And otherwise, it's 10 Central, 4 p.m. in the UK, and 8:30 p.m. in India. And that one will be called Beyond a Lawsuit, 5 Reasons to Make Websites Accessible. And Bette Hannon will be our speaker for that event. She is in Oregon and she does a lot of accessibility in her agency. And then on Monday, August 16th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, 10 a.m. in Australia Eastern Time, or 5:30 a.m. in India, we have All About WP Accessibility with Joe Dolson. And that talk is going to be sort of a double. He's going to talk a little bit about his WP Accessibility plugin, because I think a lot of people ask about it. When should they use it? When should they not use it? And then he is also going to be available to talk about what's happening with accessibility in WordPress core, answer any questions, share some upcoming things that people can look forward to. So those are 2 events. They're on our meetup page if you want to get more information about them and RSVP. Most exciting thing while you're all here is I want to introduce Taylor, which you've heard me chatting with her a little bit as people were logging on. But Taylor is an accessibility specialist, a developer, podcaster, and YouTuber in Michigan. She has been blind since birth, and through her company, Taylor's Accessibility Services, she helps clients build accessible WordPress websites and performs accessibility audits and assists with accessibility remediation. Taylor runs a Clubhouse club on WordPress accessibility, and I will admit I've never been on Clubhouse, so I don't actually know if that's what they are called. She can correct me if that's not right. And you can find her on YouTube or podcast apps under the name Taylor's Tech Talks. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to let Taylor take over. One thing that I do want to note for everyone, Taylor and I was talking about it, and I think it would actually be best if you save your questions until she pauses to ask for them or until the end of her talk, because if you type them in the chat, then Taylor, it may read out to her with her screen reader and it might be disruptive to whatever sentence she is saying currently. So for now, if we could sort of keep the chat quiet, that would be helpful. Thanks so much. And we're excited to have you, Taylor.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. And like I said, this is going to be an awesome event. And I really enjoyed speaking yesterday at WordCamp Santa Clarita. And this has just been pretty awesome. Lots of cool events. And I'm glad that we have such a great focus on accessibility for everyone. So.
Yep.
I am now sharing my screen, and what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about the importance of making your WordPress backends accessible. And so, a little bit of an intro and background. My name is Taylor Arndt, and I've been in the field of accessibility for 3 years, on and on doing different things. So, I first started off at a university where I assisted students with technical support as well as helping departments to become not only compliant but also make their content usable for everyone. And I wanted to be able to, teach the developers and the content creation or, curation at the university also as well, how to become more accessible. So lots of training and presentations, kind of just like this. And after I lost my job due to the ongoing COVID pandemic in 2020, I then decided that I was going to start my own company, Taylor's Accessibility Services, LLC, here in Michigan. And it has been my goal from day one to try to help companies become more accessible as well as more inclusive. And also helping companies who may have gotten themselves into a little bit of accessibility trouble, as lawsuits as well, because I have served as an expert witness on trials for dealing with accessibility lawsuits. So basically, it is my goal to help clients and companies to become more accessible, more inclusive, and get themselves online for the first time as well. Because believe it or not, when they get online for the first time, it's the best time to actually make them the most accessible. Because it's, they have a fresh start, and so I want to take advantage of that by making them a fresh website that's fully accessible from the get-go. I'm blind since birth, so I understand the importance of accessibility for all. I understand what happens when people don't make things accessible all the time, right? If there's unlabeled buttons, and again, Michael can tell me, every day there are things that, I may not be able to do or that are, inaccessible to a screen reader user. And, sometimes maybe even inaccessible to somebody who uses magnification software as well. And, other disabilities, right? So I understand the importance of accessibility, and that's why I want to try to help everyone, not only to be compliant, right? To comply with the WCAG and all the standards, but more importantly, to be usable for all, because just because something is compliant does not mean that it's usable for everyone. So, introduction. You most likely understand that websites have to be accessible for users on the front end, but you may fail to understand, or you may even forget about, that you should probably think about backend accessibility as well. There are many benefits for making your websites fully accessible on the backend. Obviously, the first one, right? Making sure that, it's compliant with the WCAG standards and the other standards for accessibility. But not only that, though, but it can actually go far beyond that. So, in that we're going to be talking about throughout the talk as well. So, lots of different benefits and lots of different things that we can do to try to make ourselves more accessible. Why make your WordPress website accessible on the back end? They include some of the following, like we talked about, the compliance, ensuring all parties are able to make changes to your website, which is especially important if you have a blind employee or a blind contractor, or not even blind, but somebody with a disability of some sort who may be working for you, or who may be directly having to edit the back end for some reason, right? For example, if you have a WordCamp, right, and you want to try to allow people with disabilities to be able to help organize that, they probably need to edit the back end of their website. Or, I see a lot of people in this audience have either agencies that they're developing for or with, or, own, or, they've got clients. You never know who's going to be on the receiving end of your site. You just never know. And so the best way that you can make sure you're accessible is just to be accessible back end as well. Not only the front end, but the back end as well. And so without accessibility, you're probably locking people out who may need to edit your website, and you're probably making their lives more difficult than they need to be. That's just kind of most likely what's going to happen. Without making your backend accessible, you're going to be locking out people who would need to edit that, or who could benefit by helping, try to edit the website, or vice versa. So again, it's just kind of equal access for all. And then who knows, worst case scenario, they may not be able to work for you, which would not be good, right? That wouldn't feel good, I'm sure, on the inside. So just, it's kind of an ethical thing to do. It's the most honest thing to do, and it's the best thing you can do. And it's just, like I said, it's the right thing to do. Whenever I make websites for clients, even though sometimes people tell me, hey, use Accessibility or use other things, morally, I will refuse to do that. Because again, it's just, making sure that it's fully accessible. And if I know something's inaccessible, I will not use it. And I will tell people, what I feel like, same kind of thing. So it's just the right thing to do. Considerations before website is constructed. There are a few things you should do before you construct your website to ensure your backend is accessible, right? So obviously we talked about, trying to come up with a plan, but even, beyond that, right? Trying to understand the scope of the website and getting the themes and plugins you want to use is definitely a good place to start, right? So if you already have an idea of what you want to use, for example, at Taylor's Accessibility Services, our primary theme of choice is GeneratePress. It is an awesome theme. It is fully accessible from both the front and the back end, which is awesome. And the developer is fully responsive to accessibility feedback and complaints, and their support forum is just amazing. So GeneratePress is what we exclusively use, and there's so many benefits. But even, if you're not going to use GeneratePress or you're going to use something else, have an idea of what you're going to use. That's kind of the gist of that part. Research all potential theme and plugin options to try to come up with the best solution, that will meet the accessibility needs. And here's a big one. Ensure all developers you are working with have the same commitment to accessibility that you do, right? So just because you're committed to accessibility, chances are, depending on where you got your developers or who your developers are, they probably, well, for one thing, may not even know about accessibility, right? That is the most common scenario. Last semester, I was in a class, or I had to observe, do some stuff with a college class about web development. And I kid you not, the professor's like, yeah, so we're just gonna, make the site accessible. We have to, but we're not gonna really show you how or why. It's just something we have to do to, keep ourselves out of trouble. It's like, okay, you have to go more into depth about that. But the point is that sometimes your developers don't know about accessibility, right? Most of the time they don't, because in these computer science training, or not even computer science, but web developer courses, or wherever these developers get trained, accessibility is not always emphasized or not even taught at all. And so having that conversation from the beginning will definitely save you headaches if you're really committed to the backend accessibility. And it will result in better communications. If things were to go wrong, right, you can kind of have that plan in the back end. Getting an accessibility audit and an expert is another way you can try to help, right? If you have developers who may not be the most well-versed in accessibility and you're like, I'm okay at it, but, I may not know what I'm doing. What the best next step is to get somebody like myself, or somebody who is a real user with a disability, who also preferably may be a developer as well. Because in case you haven't known or, don't know, I, as well as being a WordPress person, I do a lot of code as well. So I have the developer knowledge and the usability knowledge. And of course, dealing with WordPress, right? But I code in a bunch of different languages. And that's mainly because when I deal with accessibility remediations, I have to learn all these different languages, right? And that's just, like I said, a lot of people in the disability community, like I said, they kind of have those same skills, but not a lot of them are also users and developers as well. So if you can find kind of the blend of the two, that could definitely be an asset depending on the team you're working with. But even, like I said, if you have developers who may have a basic idea, like I said, getting an accessibility consultant, or just somebody who can educate and somebody who can explain to people the importance of making, the accessible, and kind of showing them the basics of how like a screen reader and all the different elements work as well. Choosing a theme for your needs, right? We've got a few different components to our websites. We have themes and we have plugins, right? Themes are kind of the visual aesthetics. They kind of help, dictate kind of how your site's going to function. It's very important that you choose an accessible theme, because WordPress is accessible from the front and back end. When you load up that first WordPress post, this is hello world, and you have that fresh new install, it's fully accessible. However, it's what you do on the front and the back end that can make the site totally inaccessible. And a common place that I see people go wrong is their theme selection. So, like I mentioned earlier, I use GeneratePress exclusively. And again, there are other accessibility themes out there. However, I would caution you that if you were to look at some of those other options as well, because there's many different out there, that if they just say accessibility ready, you might want to verify that yourself as well, because who knows who is doing all those accessibility reviews, and they may be compliant, right? But just because they're compliant, users might still have a hard time using them. So again, this is where the accessibility expert, and this is why website, builds, I kind of, like I said, think about them as a team effort, right? You've got all these different people involved, and trying to make it the most accessible requires, the team on both, the front and the back ends. So the developer, again, is fully committed to accessibility. But yeah, definitely conduct your own reviews before you just say, oh, this theme says it's accessible by WordPress.org or by some vendor, but we're just going to go with it. I would check that as well. Just, make sure, because, again, a lot of the problems that I see with websites are based on the themes that they use because they're inaccessible. Diving deep into plugins. So, we've obviously talked about our theme selection, but we have one more crucial part to this, and that is our theme, plugins. And they are an important component of any website, right? Because without plugins, you're not going to have a website. I mean, they help extend and add functionality to your website. So you need plugins, but on the back end, a lot of plugin developers don't know how to make their plugin like settings screens or other areas accessible for blind or other disabilities. And so that is where, blind WordPress developers like myself and, blind content posters, right, if you're, doing that kind of thing, they can run into issues with unlabeled buttons and unlabeled links and all that fun stuff. So it can be very difficult because there are so many plugins available, right? There's a lot of different plugins, and so how do I make sure the ones that I select are accessible? Well, what I would say is I would, again, have your accessibility specialist on hand and have them literally review every single plugin that you want to use on the back end. But of course, like we talked about earlier, the back and the front end kind of reflect each other, right? As well. So we want to make sure that the front end, just because the back end, right, is accessible, that's awesome, but make sure your front end is accessible as well. Because I have seen it in reverse, where plugins are accessible on the front end or the back end, but they're not accessible on the front end or vice versa. So always do that double check. Even though we're talking about back end accessibility, you still don't want to discount front end accessibility. If you're unsure of the accessibility of a plugin and you may not have somebody that can review it, you could always try to contact the developer. But I have seen mixed results with this. I have seen sometimes where plugin developers are like, I don't know if my plugin's accessible, or I think my plugin's accessible, or I know my plugin's accessible, and then it's not. So I would, not count on that as much. But again, get them reviewed. So those are kind of some of my tips on how to make your WordPress plugins and, I guess, websites fully accessible from both the front and the back end. And, like I said, it's definitely important to make your website accessible from the back end as well. So that way you can ensure everybody can use your site. And I will now open it up for some questions.
So I'll start because I have one I'm wondering about, Taylor, which is for plugin developers. What tips do you have for them that they can do if they want to make sure that everything is accessible, aside from like hiring someone? Obviously, hiring someone is great, right?
Right.
Are there common problems that you see that it's like, man, if they really just tested with XYZ, they would probably have identified this and resolved it?
Yes, there are. There are, and I'm gonna, like I said, I'll caution, by saying like, yeah, they could test with it, but again, it depends on how competent that person is with a screen reader as well, because like they can say that they found an issue, right? But maybe they don't even know how a screen reader like is supposed to work. They might just tap through things, and then they might find certain issues that kind of make sense. Maybe I don't even know if that even makes sense, but there are definitely a lot of common issues. So this question actually came up as well yesterday. And what I would say the common issues are, at first we have the alternative text. So if you have some images or some icons in your plugin backend, some like links or whatever, making sure that those images, links, or other uh, elements are fully accessible and labeled. And if they're needing to be alt text, add alt text, and add proper form labels to make sure that they're associated with a screen reader. And just don't use link titles like click here or, click this red button or something. I saw a plugin the other day. I don't know what I was doing exactly, but it literally said, oh, click this red button to continue or something. Just don't
You're
do
like,
that.
I don't know which button is red.
I don't either. No, I don't know which button's red.
Yeah. Well,
But,
I mean, and that's not just like, that could just be color blindness, right? A
right.
sighted person could also not know which one was red. Yeah.
Right. But there's so many issues. Like I said, I'd say one of the most common ones are labeling. But then I'd also say, like, if you have a lot of settings, making sure that you have headings to clearly define the different sections, right? To skip between the different elements. And then, like I said, I don't even know, Amber, like if your plugin could check like plugin backends, that even makes sense. But, getting a plugin like that, could also help, or like Wave or something that could just catch some of the coding syntactical and semantical things. But again, I would be careful because sometimes those can only catch, whatever, 28 to 35 or whatever number we were all throwing out. That can only catch so many of those problems, right? So those are kind of some of the things that I would say. But yeah, test it with a screen reader as well. But again, like I said, if you never used a screen reader before, then that could be a little bit difficult. But I mean, NVDA, non-visual desktop access, is actually what I was presenting using today. It's actually fully free. It's on Windows. If you're on Mac, there's VoiceOver, and obviously like iOS and all that stuff, you have VoiceOver as well. So, and then Windows, their narrator is built in, and then JAWS is the other screen reader. But that's, could be expensive for like developers for testing. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that helped.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good tip. And I'm pretty sure you could run Wave or Axe on the back end of the WordPress site. So
yeah, and I've done that before, actually.
So Dave had a question. What are the most common accessibility problems that you face on websites?
That is a really good question. And so what I would say is we kind of answered this right from the back end, right? But from the front end, what I would say are a lot of image alternative text, and that may be missing, or that may be like unavailable, or even as far as tables. We talked about this yesterday at WordCamp Santa Clarita. The tables sometimes that people use when they're not marked up properly, and I see this a lot in calendar plugins, and this is why I like the My Calendar plugin, because it makes fully accessible tables that look visually appealing and that are fully, like I said, usable and compliant and all that fun stuff. But I would say definitely tables, heading structure is definitely a common issue. Keyboard traps, where basically the screen reader gets stuck in some like edit boxes. I saw that a lot on different websites when I was trying to, for example, do some automations. This actually happened earlier today.
So you were stuck somewhere, you couldn't leave, and you had to like refresh the page?
Yeah, or sometimes it was so bad I had to restart my screen reader.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Frustrating. So Josh asked, what's tabbing like for you? Does Woo, I'm guessing is that WooCommerce, Josh? I don't know if you want to chime in. Does Woo do anything right that we can emulate for deep menus? I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, so
I unmute yourself and
I imagine. Oh, sorry, Taylor.
Sorry.
What I was thinking is like when there's a really elaborate, like WooCommerce especially.
Yeah.
I have sighted users that get lost in all the tabbing and stuff. So I can only imagine you have to not only be inside that admin menu, but then you have to tab within that admin menu, and then within that the tab is more stuff and all that stuff. So like.
Right. So this is why, again, screen reader usage is not just about tabs, right? I say kind of tabbing, right? That's not all we do, right? We have a lot of keyboard commands. Insert F7 brings up all the links on the page, and you can literally navigate by those by pressing the first letter of the link you want to open. there's heading commands where literally you can navigate by all the headings on the page. There's like so many different commands that we use. And so tabbing, actually, we do it like to move between form fields and stuff, but honestly, a lot of our stuff is using these keyboard shortcuts, right? Because we have to be as efficient as somebody who has sight. And unfortunately, tabbing isn't that efficient. And so that's why we have these other mechanisms. But yeah, WooCommerce, I've used that a lot. And what I would say is that, like I said, the links list and for all those other things is definitely helpful because I can literally navigate to the first letter of the link that I want to, go to, for example, or I can like search for it. And that's why screen reader find is another thing that I commonly use when I do WordPress. If I'm trying to find something, that might be on a cluttered page, I could just go in my screen reader and just type, that thing, for example. So WordPress is kind of a multi-tiered approach in terms of accessibility, right? There's sometimes that I find certain things work and sometimes that I find certain things don't work. And so that's kind of one of those things. It's kind of also up to the user, but you kind of find ways overall. But yeah, does that kind of help?
So I think actually what he might have been asking was, so on the settings page, and our settings page has this too. So this is actually a good question, which is that it's one URL and then it has a whole bunch of settings, but because we want to like break it up or make it easier for the user to step through, we've added what visually looks like tabs, almost like on like a manila folder, where there's like a tab that sticks up, and then you can, like, a sighted user can click on those and it will show different content in the main content area, and it like changes, like it adds a parameter on the URL, but it doesn't actually reload the page. Sometimes
they're like the drop downs.
Yeah, so I think that's a question, like those kinds of tabs on settings pages and plugins where it's like loading different content in the content area, and if you hit those, do you have any tips for those, or have you had problems with those?
I haven't. It all depends kind of on how they're like coded in terms of like WooCommerce and those kind of things. Like that's what kind of we're talking about. Those things actually seem to be pretty accessible, but I have seen ones. I'm trying to think of what plugin. Actually, Amber, I think yours are actually pretty good. I'm trying to think of what plugin. I have seen a couple where they're actually not that. The drop downs may not be as like accessible, meaning like you click them and they actually don't click, like they don't actually expand for screen reader users. I have definitely seen some of those. Yeah. But those are definitely, they can be made accessible, and I use them all the time. In fact, I probably use them so much that I don't really think about it, right? Because it's kind of one of those things you learn when you're doing WordPress sites. Drop downs are kind of a natural phenomena.
So the answer there would be, I think in WooCommerce, you haven't had any problems going to all those different settings pages for WooCommerce. Nope. So whatever they did is right.
That is incredibly illuminating though, because for us, it's a tab, like it's the folders, but for you, it's like an extended ordered list, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, in that kind of sense, right? It's just like a unordered list, or a list of links, right? It kind of depends on how they have it marked up as well, right? Like if it's marked up as like a link, or there can be some ARIA apply that can get a little bit tricky, but what I would say in general is WooCommerce and a lot of those plugins are doing it right. And a lot of the automatic and all those other plugins are actually very accessible. I reviewed Jetpack last week on my YouTube channel, and I did a whole back-end review, like not really a teardown, that's not the right word for it, but I kind of did, right? I kind of shared everything that was like inaccessible on the back end, and I even had my speech going as well, so you could hear what I was talking about from a screen reader perspective. It was a live stream, which I can link to. But I'm going to be doing a lot more of those because they seem to be very popular, and they help plugin developers to become more accessible.
Mm-hmm. I will admit, I'm a little nervous about mine tomorrow. Hopefully it's good.
Well, again,
but we love feedback. Feedback is great.
Yeah. So like I said, those are kind of some of the things, right? Hopefully that made sense. Again, it can be a little bit tricky, right? But it's just,
I wish Zoom had an audible thumbs up. So just, pleasing sound. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
So Nick asked, do you have a list of plugins or themes that you like? I know you mentioned GeneratePress. Do you have like plugins You mentioned the calendar one.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I think Amber, you cut out a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
I heard calendar one. Was there any other part of that question?
Or just, yeah, were there other plugins besides the one that you've mentioned already that you really like?
I have a whole list of plugins that I prefer, and actually, in my WordPress Wednesday series, what I'm starting to do, it's kind of these live streams are actually like an extension of my WordPress Wednesdays. I'm actually going through all the plugins, but basically, what I would say is it all depends on like what you're doing, but you know, right? Because you don't want every single plugin for every single site. That'd just be crazy. For podcasts, I use Pinecast as my host, so they have a great plugin that they just updated, and it's pretty awesome. In terms of forms, we use Gravity Forms around here. It has gotten a lot more accessible. I'm super happy, even on the back end. So they're doing it right, which is awesome. There's still a couple issues, but they are definitely getting a lot better. WP Forms is also another very accessible one. I have found issues with like Ninja Forms and Caldera and some of the other ones on the back end and the front end as well. At one point, Ninja Forms had like so much ARIA that it would like read like every time something like changed it. It was just crazy, just so much ARIA. And there was just a whole bunch of things with that. But what I would generally say is for forms, I like that. And then security, WordFence is very accessible on the back end. And then kind of all depends on like what things you're doing and what kind of tasks. But what I would generally say is, yeah, I have a whole list of like themes and plugins and stuff that I use on a daily basis because I know that they're going to be accessible for both the front and the back ends. And then if I ever need to test a plugin, I'll put it on a staging site first before I make it go live. And that way I can see how the back end is accessible or if it's not accessible. And if it's not accessible, I will not use it. And so those are kind of some of the things, or at least I'll try not to use it if at all possible, right?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll put in the chat, this is Taylor's YouTube channel, the link that I just posted in if you want to find some of those plugin reviews.
Yeah, we're almost at 200 subscribers, so.
That's awesome. So let's see.
I'm the 200th.
Oh, cool.
Peter was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the accessibility ready tag for themes in the repository. Said it seems like it isn't being used fully. I'm also a big fan of GeneratePress, but they don't have the accessibility ready tag. I assume they just didn't apply for it. How important or valuable do you think the accessibility ready tag is?
Yeah, so what I would say is the accessibility ready tag is, I mean, like, it's at least useful, right? But sometimes either theme developers don't know about it or, they forget to apply, right? GeneratePress is, fully accessible. And I think, if they applied, they'd obviously get it, right? But I think a lot of people don't really know about it, and that's probably why it's not being used to its fullest potential. So again, it's one of those like training things, right? That could be addressed in terms of that. But what I would say is it's good if you want to kind of see what themes might be accessible, but, it could kind of give you a good baseline, right? Because there's so many different themes out there. It'd be crazy to try to test everyone, right? That's not practical. But what I would say is if you're going to choose a theme and you already have one that you like and you know that it's accessible, like stick with it. Like GeneratePress is awesome and I stick with it even though it may not be in the accessible ready themes. But what I would say is if you have no idea where to start, then maybe the accessibility ready themes would be a good place for you to start, and then you can kind of see which ones you like or do that. I know. Yeah. So not a lot of themes even have it, right? Because, now, so it's just kind of a, yeah. So,
yeah,
I mean, you could start there.
In the chat, only 117
right.
themes have it.
Yeah.
This is the link to the handbook on make.wordpress.org that talks about the accessibility ready and what that means if you are a theme developer or you want to make it. My understanding, so I mostly lurk and every once in a while converse in, but pretty much mostly lurk in the accessibility Slack channel for WordPress.org, which anyone who has a WordPress username, you can go access and participate in the community channels. My understanding is that there is a backlog too, and of like sites that need to be reviewed for that, because unlike plugins, they check for security issues and they check for, you know, is there going to be a slug conflict? And there's some things they check for you, but there's not a ton of review on like, does this actually meet any sort of standards? But the theme review, in order to get a theme listed on WordPress.org, there's a lot more review. And then to have the accessibility ready, it's even more review, and it requires an accessibility expert or like somebody who understands to actually go test the theme and say, yes, this does meet the standard and can have the tag. So my understanding is that could be partially why there aren't as many, because they don't have a ton of people to review them when they get requested.
Yeah. So. And I didn't, like I said, I'm not in that Slack channel all that often, but yeah, I have seen mentions of that as points. And, you know, it's just kind of one of those things, because, yeah, it definitely takes a specialized set of skills to try to do that. And then, you know, there's backlog and all that other things. But I think, you know, if it could become more widely used, I think it could definitely help in the future. It's just we have to try to find a better way of, like, doing it. That kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Josh said he's a fan of webmandodesign.edu. What? I haven't heard of that.
I haven't either.
Or .eu.
Yeah, I haven't heard
of that. Is that a theme maker?
Yeah, he's got a free one. It is under the accessibility tag, the Reykjavik, and I've been using Icelander, and all the ones that he's developed in the past 2 years are accessible. They use accessible colors and fonts and tags. That's what I'm saying. It's almost as if they actually care about accessibility.
That's awesome.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, if you go to their website, it says clever accessible solutions. So they're like thinking from an accessibility first perspective rather than just adding it in later.
That's awesome. That's how we should be doing things.
Are these all free WordPress themes?
No, there's a Reykjavik one, and then there's a free theme that he has to learn Beaver Builder, which is also trying to be more accessible. I don't know if you can verify that, but yeah, I mean it's they're usually about 60 to 90 bucks. Like if you've got a hospital or a large institution, they're like 90 bucks.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. That's really cool. We are always looking for other starting points for people that don't have the budget for full custom. So this is cool. Thank you. Let me see if I missed any other questions in there. So I think that's all the questions that we had in the chat. Does anybody else have any other questions? No? Cool.